Good morning and Merry Christmas from here in England. Yes, Coastie has made a trip back home to England. It's nice and cold, dark, gloomy, very different from Asia. And look at what I have just unwrapped. This is a very special Christmas present for my parents. It is a George VI replica postbox that would go on a wall box. And that made me think, why not do a bit of a postbox challenge? For those who regularly watch the channel, you'll know that I did a three-parter in Hong Kong of all the British era postboxes. So today, the challenge is going to be to try and get around the 6 monarchs that preceded Charles II and try within a 5-mile radius of my parents' house to try and find one of each. Can I do it? Let's put our hat, coat and gloves on and let's go. And as we go in search of those boxes, we're going to find out how Wolverhampton got its name. We're going to learn about a famous visit from a very iconic monarch and also learn about one of the biggest battles in Saxon Britain. Okay, let's take a look at the 6 postboxes we're trying to find today. The first one is the Queen Victoria. Now the first ones came out in 1852 in Jersey, but we'll try and find some from the late Victorian age, and could we find a Penfold hexagonal box, maybe from the 1860s somewhere in the Wolverhampton conurbation. We'll also be looking for an Edward VII. He reigned from 1901 to 1910. There's lots still in Ireland, now painted green. We'll find some George V, no doubt. We have some here in Hong Kong. Next up, maybe the most elusive will be the Edward VIII. He only reigned for 321 days before he abdicated. So is there possibly one in and around Wolverhampton? Our final 2 will be George VI. He reigned from 1936 to 1953, and then finally Elizabeth II. They are ubiquitous, so I'm sure we'll find lots of them today, right? Let's get out into the car and go. By the order of the Peaky Blinders, Coastie Explores is off to find some postboxes, and in the village where my parents live, I know there must be quite a few different types, and the first one is up near the church, so let's go. And we've arrived at the church. This is St Nicholas Church here, and this point, this is what I learned in school, is the highest point. If you go eastwards, you won't find a higher point until you reach Russia, and right across from it is a very old postbox. Could it be a Queen Victoria? Let's see. And our first postbox today is the Edward VII. Now, Edward VII was Queen Victoria's eldest son, became King Edward in 1901 to 1910. Nice little cipher there with the V, the 1-1 for Edward VII. Let's head off from the church and see if we can find our next old postbox. Let's go. Now I did think that possibly that might be a Queen Victoria postbox there, being opposite the church, being the oldest part of the village. We're now going to head out west of the village, just outside the village, to one that I know is in the wall of a farmhouse, which could well be a Queen Victoria. So let's head out to that now. So we're just heading out the village, and I'm with senior Coastie Explores. You may remember him from the post office trilogy. Actually, there's one here on the left, Dad, just up here. We do have a wall box here. So let's quickly see, pull forward a little bit, one here, and it is a George V wall box. And that's interesting. It doesn't look as though that's from the George V era. George V being 1910 to 1936. But maybe it has been there the whole time, but I know this estate is later than his era, I believe. So, interesting one there. Right, let's continue on. here is the next one. Now this could well be a Queen Victoria. This house is definitely a Victorian farmhouse, slate house, but it is unfortunately another Edward VII wall box, just like the one up by the church. So let's head into the village. I suspect the pillar box in the village is a Queen Elizabeth one, but let's find out. Let's go. I've just come out to another intersection here, the other end of the village, on the corner of Oak and Lanes, and there always used to be one on this wall over here. Let's see if it's still here. Okay. At the moment, there is no sign that there is a post box, but I'm sure there used to be one on this wall. Let's have a quick look at Google Maps. And I'm right next to this sign here. And on that wall, it shows that there used to be a post box. And that was probably, could well have been a Victorian post box, wall box, Queen Victoria, because this is one of the oldest parts of the village. And many of the Victoria wall boxes still left in England are on these remote roads. Now I wonder, I don't know if you know, if you own the property here and this is your wall, are you entitled, if the box is no longer in use, to own that post box? Because somebody's taken it down. So let me know in the comments below. Right, let's head into the centre of the village. Actually just spoken to a neighbour, even though Google Maps says it's from 2024, the neighbour here says it's been gone many years. I do remember it as a child, but obviously nobody's been using it, so it's gone. Never mind. And I suspect this will be a Queen Elizabeth, and it is indeed a Queen Elizabeth II. These are ubiquitous here in the UK, but all over Hong Kong we have the green Queen Elizabeth post boxes. So we needed to tick it off. There it is. I think we should head sort of towards the town centre of Wolverhampton now to see if we can find a Queen Victoria one in an old part of town, or possibly that very rare Edward VIII post box. Let's go. Right, we are approaching Lowhill and Bushbury, and these areas were sort of sprouted up in the 1920s when Stanley Baldwin, the Prime Minister, together with the Housing Act, created these little suburbs, giving new affordable housing to the people of Wolverhampton, and people moved from the slum areas of the city centre out here to the suburbs. So hopefully we can find a post box around here that's probably either Edward VIII or certainly George VI. Now, interestingly, we've got a prefab estate here. Senior Coastal Explorers, what is a prefab?
Well, a prefab was a building put up immediately after the Second World War using simple materials that were readily available to provide some instant housing after much of the housing stock had been lost during the war from bombing and that sort of thing.
So sort of a quick fix really, and I see many of them now are being demolished and probably being rebuilt as new houses. But yeah, one of the last probably prefab estates, certainly here in Wolverhampton, if not the UK. Do you have a prefab estate near you? Let me know in the comments below. Right, onwards and upwards, let's find some post boxes. We are in Lowhill, and I can see a post box ahead of me. This estate, as I said, built in the 1920s and 30s, so potentially we've got an Edward VIII, that would be great, or at least a George VI. Let's see what it is. It is right here, and it is a George V pillar box. Nice one as well. There we go, so we've got a George V wall box, and now we've got the pillar box. Right, let's head to the estate next door, because that was built, it's known as the Scotlands, and that was built in 1935, 1936, when Edward VIII was on the throne, so maybe we can find one there. Let's go. Unfortunately, I've just been past and it is another George V postbox in the Scotlands, but I have seen that there is a Victoria Road just a couple of streets away, so could possibly Victoria Road give us a Queen Victoria postbox, or at least one of the ones we haven't got yet, Edward VIII or George VI. Let's go! So this is Victoria Road, no doubtedly named after Queen Victoria, and there is a post office here, and outside the post office is a post pillar box. Let's see if it is a Queen Victoria, and it is. It's a George VI. It's a Queen Elizabeth Father's pillar box, and this is 1936 to 1951, 1952. A beautiful one as well, lovely colour, must have been recently painted. Right, I think we should try a different place now. Let's head to Tahl, which is an old part of Wolverhampton. It used to be a village and it's got a very famous battle, and I know there are a couple of pillar boxes there. So let's see if we can find either an Edward VIII, but possibly a Queen Victoria at Tahl. And this is the leafy suburb of Tahl, very wealthy area. There's a Bentley going past, probably a Wolves footballer. Lots of the Premiership players live in this sort of area. Some great bakeries here. Used to come and get my crusty bread from here. But it also the scene of a very famous battle right over here. On this green is thought to be the site of the Battle of Tahl, one of the most pivotal battles in ancient British history in 904. So let's find out more about the Battle of Tahl.
The Battle of Tahl in 910 AD was instigated by a Viking retaliation against Anglo-Saxon forces. In 909, King Edward of Wessex and his Mercian allies had launched a 5-week campaign against the Northumbrian Danes. This offensive action prompted the Vikings to seek revenge. In 910, believing that most of King Edward's troops were away on ships, the Vikings launched an invasion of Mercia. They raided along the Avon River near Bristol and moved along the Severn until reaching the Bridgenorth area. As they moved eastward, they were pursued by a joint Mercian and West Saxon army, which ultimately confronted them near Tahl. The battle marked a decisive moment in the Anglo-Saxon resistance, shifting the balance of power decisively in favour of the Saxon kingdoms. The battle, led by Edward and his sister Ethelfled, managed to barbarically kill no less than 3 Viking kings, Ingvar, Eowils and Halfdan, along with many other Danish nobles. By decimating Viking leadership and reclaiming lost territories, the Anglo-Saxons took a crucial step towards the eventual unification of England. It demonstrated the growing military sophistication of Anglo-Saxon forces and signalled the beginning of the end for Viking dominance in the region. If you're ever in the Tahl area, do keep your eyes open, as there are signs of the great battle in the local street signs. And for those seeking a dramatised perspective, the Last Kingdom television series explores the historical period in its 4th season.
Just nipped over to the post office over there. Unfortunately, it's not a 10th century postbox or even a Queen Victoria, it's a Queen Elizabeth. So there's one more just round the corner that I want to check, right next to the Dog and Gum pub, very popular pub here in Tahl. And here, right outside the famous Dog and Gum pub here in Tahl, we have a George VI postbox. Nice one to tick off. There aren't a million of them around, so always nice to see a George VI. Now it's time, I think, if we head into town and take a look at the old West Park, because there's something there that was set up during Victorian times, so there might be a Queen Victoria postbox there. Let's go. Now we are in West Park, a beautiful big circular park here, just on the western edge of Wolverhampton. But it wasn't always a park. In fact, it was the first racecourse. So before we go looking for a postbox, let's find out a bit more information on the first racecourse here in Wolverhampton.
This year, 2025, marks the 200th anniversary of horse racing in Wolverhampton. In the 16th century, the area became known as Hungry Lees because of the poor wetland, which often flooded. By the 1800s, the land was leased by the Racing Committee, who were then faced with the expensive task of draining the area in readiness for their first meeting on the 15th of August 1825. It was originally known as Broad Meadows Racecourse and had magnificent grandstand overlooking the finishing line. Here's a fabulous photograph of the course in the mid-19th century. Check out St Peter's Church atop the hill. More on the history of that later. The idea for a park here began in 1861, and in 1878 the races were discontinued and the area was converted into a park, which opened on Whit Monday 1881. The flat racecourse moved to its present-day location on the former grounds of Dunstall Park Estate and was the UK's first floodlit racecourse.
And right here on the edge of West Park, built in the Victorian and Edwardian era. Will we have a Victorian one? Well, it is an Edward VII, so this is our first Edward VII pillar box today. Obviously put here between 1901 and 1910. Now let's head off to find two breweries, famous breweries here in Wolverhampton, that were built in the Victorian times, because maybe, just maybe, they may well have a Victorian postbox. Let's go. You really feel that you're in the Black Country now. In Victorian times, right here we've got the Springfield Brewery. Started in the 1870s, it was William Butler, became Mitchells and Butler, and they brewed beer here for well over 100 years. Right next to me here, you can see the remnants of an old, what looks like a primary school from the late Victorian era. And then across there, we've got an old church. And then, if I'm not mistaken, right across behind those railings is a postbox. Let's hope it's a Queen Victoria. Let's go over and find out. And in the shade of the school and the old brewery, it is another George VI, the beautiful George VI one. I think all the George VI must have all been recently repainted here in Wolverhampton. So we're still trying to find the elusive Edward VIII and the Queen Victoria. Let's head to the other brewery in town, the Banks's Brewery. Let's go. And a classic old Victorian pub, the Mason's Arms. Definitely seen better days, that one. We've made it to our second brewery. This is probably the more famous, Parks Brewery, home of Banks's Beer and the Clarendon Pub. Always sells a good pint of Banks's in there, and right outside the Clarendon, I didn't notice this, but there is a red pillar box, but it is a ubiquitous Queen Elizabeth II, so we're still on the search for a Queen Victoria pillar box. Now I did see a Queen Victoria wall box just down the road when I came out of the opticians earlier today. But that was just a wall box and it's not in use, so we still need to find a Queen Victoria postbox. So let's find out a little bit about the history of Banks's Beer, because it is shutting down, and then we'll head into town to see if we can find an Edward VIII and a Queen Victoria. Let's go.
Nestled in the heart of Chapel-Ash, Banks's Park Brewery boasts a history as rich and frothy as the beer it produces. Founded in 1875 by the industrious Thomas Banks and his son Henry, The brewery emerged from humble beginnings with just a handful of employees and an artisan well that promised liquid gold. The brewery quickly grew from its modest roots into a cornerstone of local culture, merging with other brewers in 1890 to form Wolverhampton and Dudley Breweries Limited, a name that would become synonymous with quality ales. Sadly, the brewery will be closing its doors and calling time for the last time later this year, so I thought I'd better sample the ale for one last time whilst back in the UK. Cheers to Banksy's.
Oof, we have made it into Wolverhampton city centre. It's a bit cold, so I'm going to put the gloves on, and I've changed my cap for a hat. Now, this is Wolverhampton, and this is, it says on this plaque, the oldest place in Wolverhampton. We're on the highest point, and High Point comes into the name of Wolverhampton. So let's dig a bit deeper as we go and look at the church and find out more about Saxon Wolverhampton and how it's got its name.
Wolverhampton, or Hampton as it was known, has had a settlement on top of the local hill for well over 1,000 years. The town was granted a market by charter in 985 AD by King Ethelred to Lady Wulfruna. She then gifted her lands to the monastery here, St Mary's, which later became St Peter's Collegiate Church. This church was atop of Hampton, or High Town, and the Wulfruna being gifted these lands made it become Wulfruna's Hampton, or what we now know as Wolverhampton. Signs that this was a Saxon place are seen here with this Saxon cross, thought to have been quarried during the Roman era in the 1st century and then carved in the 9th century. It's thought to have been on this spot since the 9th century. Initially a woolen cloth town, the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th and 19th century propelled Wolverhampton into a major commercial and manufacturing hub in the United Kingdom, where it became a part of the area known as the Black Country.
Now, this is the heart of Wolverhampton. This is Queen Square, named after Queen Victoria, and that man is Prince Albert. And there's an interesting tale about how that statue came here, so let's find out more about it.
Following Prince Albert's death, Queen Victoria retreated from public life, consumed by grief. Wolverhampton, like many other towns, raised funds to commission a statue in Albert's memory. The Queen herself was consulted on the design, requesting that Albert be depicted mounted on his favourite horse. The statue was created by Thomas Thornycroft, a renowned animal sculptor. It shows Prince Albert in the uniform of a field marshal, wearing the Order of the Garter, gently reining in his horse and tipping his hat to acknowledge the crowd. What makes this visit particularly poignant is the reason behind Queen Victoria's choice of Wolverhampton. During her years of mourning, she received a heartfelt letter from a group of widows in Wolverhampton, which deeply moved her. The Queen vowed that if she were to return to public life, she would visit this Black Country town to repay her subjects for their compassion. The news of the Queen's impending visit shocked the nation, as many couldn't understand why she had chosen industrial Wolverhampton over larger cities like London or Manchester. On the day of the unveiling, an estimated 100,000 people lined the streets to catch a glimpse of their monarch. Queen Victoria arrived at Wolverhampton railway station around 10 a.m, dressed entirely in black. The statue was unveiled in Queen Square, where it still stands today, affectionately known by locals as the Man on the Oss. The Queen was so moved by the reception she received and impressed by the statue that she surprised everyone by knighting the Mayor John Morris, right on the spot. This statue not only commemorates Prince Albert but also marks a significant moment in British history, Queen Victoria's return to public life and her special connection with the people of Wolverhampton. Today, the Prince Albert statue remains an iconic landmark in Wolverhampton, a testament to a remarkable day in the city's history and a symbol of the enduring bond between a grieving queen and her compassionate subjects.
Now, within 30 metres of the man on the horse, I can see two post boxes. There's one here, that is very clearly a Queen Elizabeth, and then there's one right over there by that carousel. Let's take a look, because that looks old, so that could be a Queen Victoria one. And unfortunately, it's another ubiquitous Queen Elizabeth one. So, Queen Square does not have a Queen Victoria. There is Queen Victoria Passage in Victoria Street round the corner, so let's try there. But before that, on Boxing Day, I went to Cheltenham and I found a very unusual Queen Victoria box. So let's have a look at that one. Yes, it's Boxing Day and we're here in Regency Cheltenham, sometimes known as Cheltenham Spa, and that's because in 1716 they found a medicinal spring here, and in 1788 George III visited for 5 weeks and it became known as Regency Cheltenham, and lots of beautiful buildings like this sprouted up. Now right behind me we have a Penfold postbox, very, very rare. This one is from 1866. There were 9 originally here in Cheltenham, only 8 remaining, but this is one of the rarest, earliest versions. So obviously 1866, it is a Queen Victoria one. Have you found the one in Wolverhampton, Luke? It's back to you. Now this here right in the centre is Victoria Street. Let's see if we have a bit more luck heading down here to see if we can find a Queen Victoria. Seen better days this street, unfortunately. Beautiful old Beatty's shop behind us now, shut down unfortunately. Right, let's have a look. Well, none here on Victoria Street, but we do have purportedly Wolverhampton's oldest building. It does say 1300 AD, but I don't think that's right. But it is very, very old. But round the corner is Victoria Passage. Let's take a look. Now, just outside Victoria Passage, I've seen another postbox, pillar box here. Let's see, is it a Victorian one? No. Here's a George V. That was the Queen Elizabeth II's grandfather. Now he actually knew his way around a car. He was a bit of a mechanic, just like the Queen was. She learned during World War II. And he could also fiddle with the radio as well. And he was the first king to do the King's speech. So there you go, a George V here, just outside Victoria Passage. Right, let's keep moving. And one here outside the old magistrates' courts and old police station. But unfortunately, Queen Elizabeth, they're ubiquitous here in England. Right, keep moving, keep moving. And just by the side of the church is this old Regency building here. And not many people know this, but Gwinnet, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence for Georgia, actually lived in this area and got married in the church behind. He moved here from Gloucester in 1754 as an ironmonger's apprentice, and from here he took the long journey over to America, down to Georgia, and he actually drafted their state constitution and was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, as I said. And because he didn't live very long, his signature is worth a lot of money because he didn't sign many things in his time. So there we go, Gwinnet has a connection. And Gwinnet County is one of the biggest counties, if not the biggest county, in Georgia. So check it out if you're there. Right, let's keep going. Here's an interesting Wolverhampton fact that a lot of people in Wolverhampton don't know. This square here between Lichfield Street and Princes Street was the first place in the UK where they had traffic lights. In 1927, on an experimental basis, they put up traffic lights here and then they became permanent in 1930. So there you go, Wolverhampton, first place to have traffic lights in the UK. Right, there's one more place to find this Queen Victoria postbox here, and it's Queen Street. Surely Queen Street has got a Queen Victoria postbox, and there's a lot of history there, so let's go.
Just a quick note to say thank you to all you Coasty Explore fans out there who've been sending me your pictures of you standing next to postboxes all over the world. Thank you very much.
Okay, we are at the eastern end of Queen Street here, and we've got some lovely old Regency and Victorian buildings, and this one here, number 46, this used to be a dispensary, then it became a post office, and then it ended up as an orphan asylum, and now it is the Mountain Bar and Grill. There we go. Let's walk up Queen Street. Okay, we've got 50 Queen Street here, and this was originally built as a subscription library, sort of a private library where rich people would pay to use. And then the 1850 Public Libraries Act came in, and it turned into a public library. And since then it has become assembly rooms, it's become a Crown Court, but I best remember it as an Australian pub. The Walkabout had some good days in there. Right, let's continue up the street. And actually, right next to the County Court is the old Express and Star building. This is where Jeremy Clarkson started his career as a motoring journalist back in the day. And this was built in 1889. And right outside is a ubiquitous pillar box. Is it a Queen Victoria one? Let's find out. Yes, it is. That is the Queen Victoria cipher. Late 1800s, I would say. This is past the Penfold stage, so maybe 1880s, 1890s. In dish, not used anymore. The letterbox has been sealed up, unfortunately, but we have found that elusive Queen Victoria. Now there is one more to find. Can we find that elusive Edward VIII, the very rare postbox? He was only on the throne for 321 days. There's one more place we could search in Wolverhampton. That is not a housing estate, a public housing estate, but a private housing estate that was set up in the 1930s. So let's head to Claregate for one last chance to find an Edward VIII. Let's go. So we're on the final stretch. Can we find this elusive Edward VIII box? We're just coming into Claregate now. And this estate was built in the 1930s, which puts us right in Edward VIII's time. So let's have a quick look. I've got a couple of close friends who live here, and they've never told me that they've seen one, but I don't normally talk about post boxes with them, so let's have a little look. Let's have a look, quick, there's one here on the left. Quick, stop here. He was king for only 325 days. They cast only, 271, and only 130 pillar boxes from Edward VIII are still around. Is this post box outside this newsagents here on the corner of Burland Avenue and Aldersley Road? Is this an Edward VIII? Let's see. And it is. It is our Edward VIII. We have managed to find every single monarch, excluding Charles III, of course, who does have one in Camborne, in Cambridge, today. So there we go, a very, very rare Edward VIII. So if you live in the Aldersley area, get round and check it out. Thanks for following me today. Do like and subscribe to my videos. It's been a cold journey all around Wolverhampton. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about the history of the town. And it's time for me to get back to Asia and warm up. Bye for now. See you on the next Coastie Explores.